Marcus Hayes stood alone in the middle of a junkyard on the east side of Detroit, staring at what remained of an old food truck. The paint had peeled off, the back doors hung loose, and the engine hadn't roared to life in over 3 years. Rust gnawed at the wheel wells like a disease, and someone had once spray-painted the side with the words "closed for good." It was perfect. The yard manager, a wiry man with a thick coat and no patience, looked at Marcus skeptically. "You sure about this one?" he asked.
"She's not gonna make it far."
Marcus ran a hand across the dented metal side panel. "She doesn't need to go far. Just a few blocks.
Maybe a little furté someday."
"You cooking in it? Feeding people?" The man raised his brows but said nothing. A few minutes later, the truck was Marcus's, for $120 and a handshake. He climbed into the driver's seat, wiped the dust off the cracked steering wheel, and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt like he was back in a kitchen. Except there were no stars above this truck.
No Michelin rating, no screaming sous-chef, no wine pairing, no press. Just the ghost of a chef, breathing life back into a forgotten shell.
That night, under the yellow glow of a streetlight, Marcus slept in the back of the truck with nothing but a blanket, a half-eaten bag of bread, and a notebook filled with recipes he hadn't dared open since prison. In another time, Marcus had it all. He had once stood in the bustling kitchen of Hayes & Sons, a fine dining restaurant in downtown Chicago, featured in Bon Appetit and praised in the New York Times. He'd served roasted duck confit to politicians and invented a truffle risotto that made even the harshest critics weep. But none of that mattered after the crash. It had been a snowy night. One too many glasses of bourbon after a celebratory service.
One wrong turn. One life lost. The man's name was Elijah Jenkins.
32 years old. A father. A volunteer coach at a community center. And Marcus had killed him. 5 years in prison.
5 years of silence.
Of peeling potatoes in the prison kitchen and not touching a chef's knife out of shame. When he got out, nobody waited. Not the partners who'd once toasted to him. Not the food critics. Not even his brother. And so, Marcus came to Detroit, a city that knew something about collapse. A city where second chances were as rare as full fridges, and where people needed hot meals more than haute cuisine. It took 3 weeks to fix the truck enough to make it mobile. Marcus sold his watch, his old chef coat, and what little remained of his pride to buy a used propane stove, a single burner, a dented stockpot, and a cooler that barely stayed cold. The first soup he made was sweet potato and black bean, cheap, filling and warm. He parked at an abandoned lot across from an old laundromat and set out 2 folding chairs and a hand-painted sign, "Hot food.
No question.
No charge." The first person to approach was a woman with a boy no older than 6. She had tired eyes, cracked lips, and a stroller full of torn blankets. The boy stared at the steam rising from the pot. "Is this real?" the woman asked. Marcus didn't smile. He only ladled the soup into a paper bowl and handed it to her.
Then another for the boy.
The boy didn't wait. He dropped to the curb and started eating with his fingers, burning his tongue, but still going. Marcus looked away. That night, he served 16 bowls. He slept in the truck again, the leftover soup sealed in an old plastic container, unsure if anyone would return. They did. By the end of the week, there were 30 people. By the end of the second, 45. A quiet queue formed each evening before dusk. No one said much. Some nodded. Some left notes. One man brought a bag of onions. Another left 2 cans of beans and a folded dollar bill.
On the 15th day, Marcus met Lena Moral.
She arrived with her son, same one from the first day, and handed Marcus a Ziploc bag full of chopped cilantro. "You need a little green in that soup," she said. He stared at the bag. "Thanks. You're not from around here, are you?"
"No. You a chef or something? Something like that."
She raised a brow. "Well, I'm a nurse. Or, I was. Laid off when the clinic closed. Now I do cleaning gigs when I can. You need help chopping stuff, I'm fast."
"You work alone."
"You won't last long that way." And with that, she left. The next day, she came back. With carrots. And stayed. She didn't ask for permission to help. She just did. Soon, Marcus found himself working with her side by side. She was efficient, quiet, and sharp-tongued when needed. "You need more salt," she said one day, after tasting a stew. "I measured exactly." "Yeah, well, taste trumps math. Add salt." He did. She was right. A week later, the truck made the local news. A grainy video showed Marcus handing out bowls in the snow. "Former celebrity chef feeds Detroit's homeless for free," the headline read. Suddenly, strangers appeared, not just for food, but for photos. A young woman asked if she could post about it on Instagram. A man with a podcast asked for an interview. Donations began to arrive: bread, canned goods, even a box of cheap utensils. But not all attention was kind. A man in a pressed shirt stood at the edge of the lot one evening, arms crossed. "You got a permit for this?" "No," Marcus said simply. "You can't just hand out food like this. Health code, insurance, liability."
If he stop, people go hungry.
"That's not my problem."
The man left, but the warning linge like a bitter aftertaste.
That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat in the truck, staring at his hands, remembering the day he lost everything.
Remembering the flashing lights.
The sirens. The blood.
And the silence after.
He didn't know if this would last. He didn't know if he deserved for it to. But he knew one thing: he couldn't go back. And if this was all he had left, a rusted truck, a pot of soup, and a line of hungry people, then he would fight for it. Even if it meant feeding the world one spoon at a time. The following morning brought a cold wind and a sense of unease that Marcus couldn't quite shake. He stood in the back of the truck, watching the steam rise from a fresh pot of lentil stew. The savory smell drifted through the air, but his mind wasn't on flavor. It was on the man from the city, the one with the clipboard and the frown, who had promised to follow up. Lena arrived just after sunrise, bundled in a red hoodie and fingerless gloves. Her boy Matteo was wrapped in layers, his breath fogging the air as he kicked at chunks of ice on the sidewalk. "You okay?" Lena asked as she climbed into the truck. Marcus handed her a knife. "We're expecting more today."
Word is getting out.
"That's not what I asked." He didn't answer. Lena started slicing onions, her movements quick and practiced. "Look, if this thing is stressing you out, you should say something."
You're not Superman.
"No," Marcus said, his voice flat. "I'm not." The weight of his past pressed against him like frost creeping through glass. He knew attention was dangerous. When people looked too closely, they saw things they weren't meant to, not the food, not the warmth, but the cracks in the man behind it. Still, they served over 60 meals that day. And another 70 the next. Each bowl handed out was another stitch holding Marcus's soul together. Each smile was another excuse to keep going. But cracks, even the smallest ones, deepen over time. The following week, a reporter showed up. Rebecca Lang was young, eager, and wore a coat too thin for the Detroit winter. She stood in line like everyone else, snapping photos with her phone, jotting notes in a small leather notebook. When her turn came, Marcus handed her a bowl without a word. "Thanks," she said.
Your Marcus est, right?
"The chef." He didn't flinch, but his hands tightened around the ladle.
I've heard of you.
Ils sont. Chicago. You had a duck dish people still talk about on foodie forums. "I don't do interviews," he said. She shrugged. "I'm not here for an interview."
Just hungry.
But she didn't leave. Instead, she found a spot on the curb, pulled out a spoon, and started eating. Then she came back the next day. And the next.
By the third day, Lena was suspicious. "She's watching you," she said, glancing out the truck window. "I know. You gonna do something?" Marcus stirred the stew. "Let her watch." That night, a blog post appeared online. "The Chef Who Fell," and Federal. It wasn't cruel. In fact, it was oddly respectful. It chronicled Marcus's fall from grace, the accident, the prison sentence. Then it described the truck, the people in line, the meals. It ended with a quote Marcus had never said. "Sometimes feeding others is the only way to feed yourself." He knew then that Rebecca had done her homework. The kind of homework that went beyond blogs and Yelp reviews. She had dug into court records, maybe even prison files. He also knew the fallout was coming. The next morning, the line was longer than ever. Some came because they were hungry. Others came because they were curious. A few came with cameras, and some came with judgment. An older man in a lion's hoodie stepped forward, sneered at Marcus, and refused the soup. I don't eat food made by killers. Marcus didn't respond. He kept serving, but the words echoed. Lena heard them too. And that night, after Mateo had fallen asleep in the back of her car, she confronted Marcus. Is it true? She asked quietly. He didn't look up from the pot he was cleaning. Yes. You went to prison? Yes. For what? He paused. Vehicular manslaughter. I was drunk. I hit a man. He died. Lena leaned against the doorframe of the truck, her face unreadable. And you didn't think to mention this? It's not something I lead with. I trusted you. I brought my son here. I never lied. No, you just left out the part where you killed someone. The silence between them grew heavy. The pot in Marcus's hands trembled slightly, and he set it down. I came here because I had nothing left. Not my name, not my reputation. Just this truck, this stove, and the need to do something decent with what I have left. Lena looked away, blinking rapidly. And what about the man you killed? What does his family get? Nothing, Marcus said. Because there's nothing that could ever be enough. Lena didn't answer. She stepped out of the truck and walked into the night without saying goodbye. The days that followed were colder, quieter. Lena didn't return. Mateo didn't either. Marcus ran the truck alone, his movements more mechanical, the food a little more bitter. Without Lena's touch, the cilantro went missing. The carrots were less crisp. The soup tasted fine, but not warm. Tyrell Jenkins showed up the following Friday. He was tall, wiry, and wore a coat 2 sizes too big. His face was young, but his eyes were already tired. Word is, you're looking for help, he said. I'm not. I can cook. Sort of. Did a program inside. 6 months kitchen duty. Marcus looked up. You were inside? Yeah. Robbery. Nothing violent. Why do you want to work here? Tyrell shrugged. Heard you give people chances. Thought maybe you'd give one more. Marcus considered it, then shook his head. Not today. Tyrell stared at him. Right? Because only certain criminals get to cook for the public. Huh? The words hit hard. Marcus said nothing. Tyrell walked away. That night, Marcus dreamed of fire, of screaming tires, of flashing lights, and the silence that came after. He woke before dawn, hands shaking. The crack in the foundation was widening. On Sunday, someone slashed the tires on the truck. Marcus found the truck leaning awkwardly on one side. A message scratched into the side in jagged letters. We don't forget. He didn't call the police. Instead, he sat on the curb, watching the sunlight crawl across the pavement, breathing in the cold like it might freeze his guilt away. He thought of Lena, of Tyrell, of the man in the lion's hoodie, of the thousands of meals he might serve that would never make him whole. Then, slowly, he stood up. He had work to do. The slashed tires had been replaced with used ones, cheap and mismatched, but they carried the truck back into service. Marcus didn't announce anything, didn't post a plea for help, didn't file a report. He simply showed up again the next evening with a new pot of stew and the same quiet determination. The line of hungry faces was there, waiting, as though nothing had happened. But something had changed. The crowd was no longer just the homeless, the unemployed, and the forgotten. Now there were curious strangers with smartphones, neighborhood activists with questions, and a handful of angry voices. Some came to eat. Others came to watch. A few came to judge. Rebecca Lang was there again, notebook in hand. She never pushed, never asked for another quote, but Marcus felt her eyes on him like a second shadow. Halfway through the line, a man shouted, "We shouldn't be eating food made by a convict. You think this makes him a saint? He's still a killer." The air froze. People looked from the man to Marcus, waiting for a reaction. Marcus ladled another bowl, handed it to the woman in front of him, and said nothing. But the crack of shame inside him widened. That night, when the line was gone and the pot scraped empty, Marcus sat on the curb beside the truck, staring at his hands. They were red and swollen from the cold, from the knives, from the endless stirring. Hands that had once plated truffle risotto for senators. Hands that had once gripped a steering wheel, drunk and reckless. Tyrell appeared again. "Still think you don't need help?" he asked, shoving his hands into his coat pockets. Marcus looked up. "You don't quit easy, do you? I can dice an onion faster than you. And I don't scare easy. You need someone who doesn't care what people yell." Marcus studied him. There was defiance in his eyes, but also hunger. Not just the hunger for food, but the hunger to matter. Show up tomorrow at 5, Marcus said. No promises. Tyrell smirked. That's all I needed. The next day, Marcus watched as Tyrell clumsily washed carrots in a cracked plastic tub. His knife skills were rough, his rhythm off, but he worked with intensity, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. Slower, Marcus instructed. Control matters more than speed. You cut yourself, you're useless to me. Tyrell slowed, nodded. Got it. By the end of the evening, they had served 84 bowls. Tyrell's hands were blistered, but he grinned as the last man shuffled away with a full belly. That felt good, he said. Marcus didn't smile, but something inside him eased. Don't get used to it. Tomorrow will be harder. 2 nights later, a church van pulled up beside the truck. Out stepped Reverend Ethan Brooks, his collar neat, his face weathered by decades of sermons and funerals. He had once been a friend of Marcus's back in Chicago, before the crash, before the prison sentence. Now his presence was like a ghost from another lifetime. Marcus, Ethan said softly. Didn't expect to see you here. Marcus kept ladling stew. Didn't expect you either. I heard about what you're doing. Feeding people in the cold. It's good work. Good work doesn't erase what I did. No, it doesn't, Ethan said. But maybe it matters anyway. They stood in silence as the line shuffled forward. Finally, Ethan asked, Do you have the proper permits? Marcus snorted. You sound like the guy from the city. I have to ask. You're putting yourself at risk. And the people who eat here. They're already at risk. Starvation's worse than spoiled stew. Ethan sighed. I'm not your enemy, Marcus. I want to help. But people will talk. They already are. You need to be ready. Marcus didn't answer. He just filled another bowl. That Sunday, Rebecca published another article. Feeding the Forgotten. Hope, Risk, and Redemption in Detroit. It was not an attack piece, but it was thorough. She wrote about Marcus's conviction, the accident, the prison time. She quoted Ethan, who had cautiously defended Marcus's work. She interviewed Lena, who refused to condemn but admitted she no longer trusted him. She even spoke to people in line, some who praised him, others who doubted his motives. The article ended with a simple question. Can one man's penance nourish a city, or does his past poison every bowl he serves? The piece went viral. Donations doubled. Criticism tripled. A councilwoman demanded investigation. An activist group launched a petition to shut the truck down. Another group started a fundraiser to buy Marcus better equipment. Marcus read none of it. He only listened to the murmurs in line, the whispers that always reached his ears. Is it safe? Do you think he's really changed? Does it matter if the food's hot? The noise pressed down on him like the walls of a prison cell. One evening, as Marcus stirred a pot of chicken and rice, Tyrell approached. Why don't you fight back? People calling you a killer, acting like you shouldn't even be here. Why not defend yourself? Marcus didn't look up. Because they're not wrong. Tyrell frowned. You're not the same man who got drunk and drove that night. I'm still the man who killed someone. Tyrell slammed the cutting board with his fist. And I'm still the kid who stole from a liquor store. But you gave me a chance. If you can't believe you've changed, how the hell am I supposed to believe I can? Marcus froze. For a long moment, the only sound was the bubbling pot. Then he said quietly, Maybe you're supposed to be better than me. Tyrell shook his head. No, man. Maybe we're supposed to be better together. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in the truck, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city hum outside. He thought of Elijah Jenkins, the man he'd killed. He thought of Lena and Mateo, who hadn't returned. He thought of Ethan, standing there in his collar, still believing in grace. He thought of Tyrell, angry and hopeful, trying to build something out of nothing. And he wondered if he could ever build anything again. In the distance, sirens wailed. For a moment, he was back in the snow, headlights blinding, bourbon on his breath. He squeezed his eyes shut. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow we feed again. But deep down, he knew the cracks were spreading. And soon, the whole truck might collapse. Snow flurried across the Detroit skyline as Marcus parked the truck in an empty church lot. He had received permission, grudgingly, from Reverend Ethan to use the space for something larger than the usual line of bowls. Tonight, Marcus wanted to do more than feed the hungry. He wanted to set a table, a real table, and invite everyone who came to sit together. The idea had grown inside him since Tyrell's outburst. We're supposed to be better together, the young man had said. Marcus kept turning those words over in his mind. Feeding people was survival. Eating together was communion. Maybe it was time to see if communion could exist in a city that doubted him. They set up folding tables and mismatched chairs under the church awning. Tyrell carried crates of bread donated by a bakery. Marcus ladled thick beef stew into plastic containers that doubled as bowls. Ethan's parish volunteers lit kerosene heaters, their faint warmth fighting the bitter wind. By dusk, a crowd had gathered. Some were regulars, faces Marcus knew by sight, if not by name. Others were newcomers, drawn by the rumor of a free sit-down meal. Among them, to Marcus's surprise, was Lena. Mateo clung to her hand, his cheeks red from the cold. She didn't greet Marcus, didn't even look at him, but she stayed, and that was something. As the first guest sat down, Marcus stood awkwardly at the head of the tables. He was not a man for speeches. His voice carried better in kitchens than on stages. But tonight he had to try. Food is survival, he began. But it's also a way of saying we belong somewhere. That's why we're doing this. Not just to eat, but to sit down together. No questions. No judgment. Just a meal. The crowd murmured approval. People filled their bowls, broke pieces of bread, and for a brief moment, the lot felt alive with warmth. Children laughed. Old men compared stories. Strangers shared salt packets like neighbors. But harmony never lasts long. Halfway through the meal, a man with a harsh voice cut through the chatter. It was the same man from before, the one who'd refused food, who had called Marcus a killer. He stood now at the edge of the table, glaring. "This is a joke," he said loudly. "We're all sitting here, breaking bread with a murderer. You think this washes away his sins? You think one stew erases a man's life?" Silence spread across the tables. All eyes turned to Marcus. Lena stiffened, her jaw tight. Tyrell clenched his fists, ready to leap to Marcus's defense. Ethan stepped forward, but Marcus lifted a hand to stop him. "No one said it erases anything," Marcus said quietly. "I'm guilty. I took a life. That doesn't go away. But people here still need to eat. And if my hands can make food, then I'll make it. Not to erase what I did, just to keep someone else alive." The man sneered. "Convenient excuse. Feeding us doesn't make you holy. It just makes you feel better." "Maybe," Marcus admitted. "But even if it only makes one kid less hungry tonight, isn't it worth it?" The man turned away, muttering. But the crack in the evening's peace was deep. Conversations dimmed, spoons slowed. The warmth shrank back under the weight of suspicion. Afterward, when the tables were cleared and the crowd dispersed, Lena approached Marcus. Her face was pale in the streetlight. "He's not wrong," she said. "You don't get to cook your way out of this." Marcus wiped his hands on his apron. "I know. Then why do you keep going?" "Because I don't know how to stop." She looked at him for a long time. Mateo tugged at her sleeve, asking if they could go home. She nodded, pulling him close. Before leaving, she said, "You're feeding people, Marcus. But I don't know if you're healing them. Or just yourself." Later that night, Marcus sat in the truck, staring at the empty stockpot. His reflection warped across its steel surface. He thought of Elijah Jenkins, the man he had killed. He wondered if Elijah's family would spit at the idea of him feeding strangers. He wondered if they'd demand he stop pretending. Tyrell sat across from him, legs stretched out, munching on a piece of bread. "You did good," the young man said. "Don't let that guy mess with your head." "He's right," Marcus murmured. Tyrell frowned. "He's bitter. That's all." "He's right," Marcus repeated louder. "I killed someone. I can't wash that off. Every meal I cook is just noise, trying to drown out the silence of what I did." Tyrell slammed the bread down. "You ever think maybe people need that noise? You fed more than 100 tonight. That counts for something. You keep saying the past defines you. Fine. But what about us? People like me? You gave me a chance. That's more than anyone else ever did." Marcus met his eyes. For once, he saw not anger there, but desperation. A plea. As though Tyrell's belief in himself was tied directly to Marcus's belief in redemption. Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. He only looked away. 2 days later, Rebecca published another article. This time, it wasn't just about Marcus. It was about the dinner. Bread broken in Detroit. Can one meal mend a city? She described the atmosphere, the laughter, the accusations. She quoted Marcus's admission, "I'm guilty. I took a life." And she ended with a challenge. If redemption cannot be found in feeding the hungry, then where can it be found? The article spread quickly. Some praised it as moving. Others dismissed it as naive. Debates erupted online, on radio shows, even in city council chambers. Should a man with Marcus's past be allowed to lead a community effort? Should he be celebrated or shunned? The scrutiny was suffocating. Marcus stopped reading. He stopped looking at the cameras. He cooked, he served, he cleaned, and he repeated. But inside, the doubt gnawed at him like rot in the beams of an old house. That evening, as he locked up the truck, he noticed Lena standing nearby. She hadn't spoken to him in days. Now she looked weary, torn. "Mateo keeps asking when we're coming back," she said quietly. "I don't know what to tell him." "Tell him the food's still here," Marcus said. "And so am I." She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't want him to grow up thinking redemption is easy." Marcus's voice hardened. "It's not. Every day I wake up and remember what I did. Every day I carry that weight. Nothing about this is easy." Her eyes softened, but only slightly. "Maybe not. But for some of us, it's impossible." She turned and walked away. Marcus stood in the cold, watching her disappear into the night. The truck behind him felt heavier than ever. The line tomorrow would still be there. The stew would still simmer. The bread would still break. But his own cracks were spreading wide enough to swallow him whole. And he wondered, how long before the whole thing collapsed? The days following the church dinner stretched into a strange quiet. People still came to the truck every evening, but the air around the line felt different. It wasn't just hunger anymore. It was curiosity, judgment, even suspicion. A man whispered into his phone while waiting for his bowl. A woman snapped photos of every detail: the truck, the food, the faces of those eating. Marcus had learned to ignore the clicks and the murmurs, but he could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The meals were no longer invisible. They were under a microscope. And yet, more people came than ever before. The line doubled, then tripled. Volunteers began to trickle in. Students from the community college, a retired nurse, even a postal worker who brought loaves of bread after his route. The truck was no longer just Marcus's project. It was slowly becoming a community's. Still, Marcus couldn't shake the hollow ache inside him. Every ladle of stew reminded him of Lena's words. "I don't want Mateo growing up thinking redemption is easy." He kept glancing toward the crowd, hoping to see her and her son. Days passed. They didn't come. It was Tyrell who broke the silence one night. "We can't keep doing this like it's just a line," he said, drying dishes with a rag. "People come, they eat, they leave. It's survival, sure, but it ain't community." "Not really." Marcus looked up. "What do you want to do? Host a banquet every night?" Tyrell shrugged. "Why not? People need more than food. They need to feel like they belong, like they got a place." The word stayed with Marcus. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay on the thin mattress in the back of the truck, staring at the ceiling, thinking of long dining tables at Hayes and Sons. He thought of how people connected over courses and wine pairings, how meals brought strangers into the same conversation. If fine dining could create communion, why couldn't street stew? By dawn, he had made his decision. The announcement spread quickly through word of mouth. One night only, a community dinner. No line, no waiting, no takeout bowls. A table for everyone. Sit down, eat together, share the bread. Marcus and Tyrell worked for days, hauling folding tables from the church basement, collecting donations of mismatched chairs, and prepping vegetables until their hands cramped. Volunteers signed up to serve and clean. Ethan offered the church courtyard again, warning Marcus that the turnout might be unpredictable. "It's risky," Ethan said. "You're inviting strangers to sit down together in a city that barely trusts itself." Marcus tightened the strap of his apron. "That's the point." On the evening of the dinner, the courtyard was lit with strings of borrowed Christmas lights. The smell of stew and fresh bread drifted into the neighborhood, carried by the winter wind. Slowly, people arrived, families clutching each other's hands, men wrapped in heavy coats, children chasing one another across the cracked pavement. Volunteers guided them to the tables. Some sat immediately, others hovered, uncertain, until they saw someone else do it first. To Marcus's shock, Lena arrived with Mateo. She kept her distance, choosing a seat at the far end of the table, but she was there. Mateo's eyes widened at the lights, the bread, the sound of laughter. Marcus felt a weight lift off his chest, if only for a moment. The tables filled quickly. Marcus moved among them, ladling stew, handing out bread, offering words he hadn't spoken in years. "Enjoy. Eat well. There's more if you need it." For the first half hour, the atmosphere was electric. People ate, talked, even laughed. Strangers shared salt packets, passed bread baskets, told stories about the cold, about the jobs they had lost, about the families they still missed. For one fleeting moment, Marcus saw what Tyrell had envisioned. Not just survival, but community. But peace is fragile. A group of men stood at the edge of the courtyard, their arms crossed. Among them was the man who had called Marcus a killer. He hadn't come to eat. He had come to confront. "This is all a performance," the man shouted, cutting through the chatter. "A murderer trying to look like a saint. You people are fools for sitting here." The tables fell silent. Spoons hovered in midair. Children looked to their parents for guidance. All eyes turned to Marcus. Marcus's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to shout back, but the words refused to come. The silence grew heavier with every second. Finally, Tyrell stood up. "Yeah, he killed someone," Tyrell said, his voice sharp. "He knows it. We all know it. But you think feeding people doesn't matter just because his hands aren't clean? Tell that to the kid who hasn't eaten all day. Tell that to the grandmother who can finally sit down and eat with her neighbors instead of freezing alone. This food matters. And if you can't see that, then maybe you don't belong at this table." The courtyard buzzed with whispers. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uneasily. The man at the edge sneered but didn't respond. Eventually, he turned and left, muttering under his breath. Marcus looked at Tyrell, gratitude flickering behind his tired eyes. But he also saw the anger there, the wound that hadn't healed. Tyrell hadn't defended Marcus out of forgiveness. He had defended the meal, the people, the possibility of something larger than both of them. The dinner continued, though the mood was subdued. People finished their bowls, stacked their dishes, thanked the volunteers. One by one, they drifted back into the night, leaving only the glow of the lights and the smell of bread lingering in the cold air. When the last table was folded and the last chair packed away, Lena approached Marcus. Mateo was asleep on her shoulder, his head buried in her coat. "It was a good thing you did tonight," she said. Her voice was softer than before, but her eyes still carried steel. "But don't mistake it for forgiveness." Marcus nodded. "I know." She looked at him for a long moment, then turned and walked away into the dark. Later, inside the truck, Marcus collapsed onto the mattress, exhausted. Tyrell sat across from him, biting into a leftover roll. "You saw it, right?" Tyrell said. "What it could be?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, I saw it." Tyrell leaned forward. "Then let's make it bigger. Not just one night. Every week. Every block. A real table for this city." Marcus stared at the ceiling, the echoes of the evening still ringing in his ears. He wanted to believe it was possible, but he also knew the scrutiny was growing, that the cracks in his life were spreading faster than he could mend them. Still, he whispered the only truth he could cling to, one table at a time. And in the silence that followed, Marcus wondered how long that table would hold before the weight of his past shattered it completely. The article landed on a Monday morning, printed in bold across the front page of the Detroit Gazette. "Killer Chef, should Marcus Hayes be serving the city?" Rebecca Lang's byline sat beneath the headline. She hadn't written with her usual restraint this time. The piece was raw, dramatic, and designed to provoke. It recounted the crash in Chicago in vivid detail, the bourbon, the snow, the death of Elijah Jenkins. It described Marcus's prison sentence and speculated about the wisdom of allowing an ex-convict to feed the most vulnerable citizens without oversight. The final paragraph was a dagger. "Redemption is admirable, but when redemption risks public safety, at what point does it become recklessness?" By noon, the phones in City Hall were ringing. By evening, TV vans crowded the block where Marcus parked the truck. Reporters shouted questions. "Do you think criminals should run food programs? What would you say to Elijah Jenkins's family? Are you trying to buy forgiveness one bowl at a time?" Marcus said nothing. He ladled soup. He handed out bread. He turned his back on the cameras. But the damage was done. That night, after the last bowl was served, Marcus and Tyrell discovered the truck's windows smashed. Glass glittered across the pavement. Inside, the cooler was overturned, the propane line cut. Scrawled in black paint across the side panel were the words, "Murderer." Tyrell cursed, pacing in the snow. "This is bull. We can't let them do this. We can't just stand here." Marcus stared at the wreckage, silent. His hands shook, but not from the cold. Something inside him, something he had fought to keep buried, had been ripped open again. The crash, the sirens, Elijah's name. It was all back, burning in the night air. Tyrell turned to him. "Say something, man," Marcus finally whispered. "Maybe they're right." The next day, Reverend Ethan appeared at the truck, his face grave as he surveyed the damage. "You need protection," he said, "and permits, and maybe a board of oversight. If you keep running this by yourself, it will only get worse." Marcus shook his head. "I didn't start this to build an organization. I just wanted to feed people." Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "And you have. But when the work grows, so does the responsibility. People are watching, Marcus. Some are inspired. Others are waiting for you to fail. If you collapse now, you'll take their hope down with you." Marcus wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. Ethan was right. Every night, more people came to eat. Every night, Tyrell showed up ready to chop and stir, believing this place could change his life. And Lena, though she kept her distance, still brought Mateo when she could, still trusted the food enough to feed her son. Marcus couldn't walk away. Not yet. The following Friday, the truck was repaired enough to run. Volunteers brought duct tape and plywood, patching the broken windows. Donations arrived, blankets, canned beans, a second-hand propane tank. The line returned, longer than ever. The people had read the article, seen the vandalism, heard the debate. And still, they came. Rebecca was there too, her notebook clutched in gloved hands. She looked smaller than Marcus remembered, her confidence dimmed by guilt. When the line thinned, she approached him. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean for it to escalate like this." Marcus kept ladling soup. "You meant every word you wrote." "I meant to raise questions, yes. But I didn't expect." "You expected exactly this." Marcus cut in, his voice low and sharp. "That's how headlines work. You get people angry. You get them scared. And you got what you wanted." Rebecca flinched. "I thought the story would start a conversation. Maybe bring in support." Marcus looked at her finally, his eyes burning. "You don't start a fire and act surprised when the house burns down." She had no reply. She stepped back, watching as Marcus handed another bowl to a shivering teenager, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. That night, after the line dispersed, Tyrell stayed behind, stacking crates. His jaw was tight, his movements restless. "I know who he was," Tyrell said suddenly. His voice was low, almost a growl. "The man you killed. Elijah Jenkins. You ever think about him?" Marcus froze. The name, spoken aloud, sliced through him. "Every day," he whispered. Tyrell's hands trembled on the crate. "He was my brother." The silence that followed was heavier than anything Marcus had ever felt. His chest hollowed out, his breath caught in his throat. Tyrell's eyes burned with fury and grief. "You think feeding a few hundred strangers makes it right?" Tyrell said, his voice shaking. "You think standing over a pot of soup pays for what you took from me? From my family?" Marcus swallowed hard, but no words came. Nothing he could say would matter. "I should hate you," Tyrell said. "I did hate you. For years. When I was locked up, when I had nothing, I thought about you walking free. And now I'm standing here, cooking beside you, like none of it happened." "I never knew," Marcus whispered. His voice cracked. "I never knew who he was. But I am sorry, Tyrell. More than I can ever say." Tyrell's fists clenched. For a moment, Marcus thought he might swing, that the weight of grief and rage would finally boil over. But instead, Tyrell dropped the crate and stormed out of the truck, disappearing into the night. Marcus sank onto a chair, his body trembling. The truth was out now. The line between past and present had collapsed. The man he had killed was no longer just a memory. It was the brother of the only person who believed in him. And Marcus knew this fire would either consume them both or forge something neither of them had expected. At dawn, Marcus sat alone in the truck, staring at his reflection in the pot of cold stew. He thought of Elijah's face, though he had only seen it once in a photograph during the trial. He thought of Tyrell, carrying that wound for years, now forced to share space with the man who caused it. And he thought of himself, still trying to pay a debt that could never be paid. Outside, the line began to form again. Hungry people, tired people, people who didn't care about headlines or histories, only the promise of a hot meal. Marcus stood, lit the burner, and reached for the ladle. His hands still shook, but he steadied them. He couldn't undo the fire from the past, but he could choose what to do with the fire still burning in front of him. Snow clung to the edges of the church courtyard like stubborn scars. Marcus stood inside the truck, stirring a pot of bean stew, but his mind wasn't on the food. It hadn't been for days. Tyrell hadn't returned since the night he revealed the truth. Every scrape of the ladle, every hiss of the burner, echoed in the silence he left behind. The line outside was shorter now. The article, the vandalism, the shouting matches, it had worn people down. Some still came faithfully, desperate and hungry. Others stayed away, too proud or too afraid to be associated with a man whose sins were printed on every newspaper stand. Marcus understood, but each empty space and line felt like another piece of him breaking. A knock at the back door startled him. When he opened it, Lena stood there, clutching a paper bag. Mateo peeked out from behind her legs, rubbing his eyes against the cold. "I brought something," Lena said, handing him the bag. Inside were chopped peppers, cilantro, and a small container of lime wedges. "Thought you could use some color." Marcus blinked, unsure how to respond. "Thank you. I'm not here to forgive you," she said quickly. "I'm here because people still need to eat. And one man can't carry this alone." Her words stung, but they were also a lifeline. Marcus nodded. "I could use the help." That night, they worked side by side again, though the space between them felt wide as an ocean. Mateo sat on a crate, humming to himself, occasionally asking for scraps of bread. When the last bowl was served, Marcus turned to Lena. "Why now?" She hesitated, pulling her coat tighter. "Because Mateo asked why we stopped coming. He said the food tasted like home. And I realized, maybe it's not about trusting you. Maybe it's about showing him what community looks like, even when it's messy." Marcus's throat tightened. He wanted to say more, but instead, he whispered, "Thank you for coming back." The next few days, the courtyard began to buzz with energy again. Word spread that Lena had returned, bringing other mothers with her. Soon, a group of women, some laid-off nurses, some part-time cleaners, some grandmothers, joined the effort. They brought their own spices, recipes, and tricks. The stew pot became fuller, richer, more alive than it had in weeks. Ethan opened the church basement as a makeshift prep kitchen, offering long tables and extra burners. Volunteers chopped, stirred, and packed meals. Children played between the tables, weaving through legs and crates, their laughter mingling with the clatter of knives. It was chaotic, but it was beautiful. For the first time, Marcus felt the burden lifting. The truck was no longer his alone. It belonged to them all. And yet, one shadow lingered, Tyrell. Every evening, Marcus looked toward the street, hoping to see the young man's lanky frame approaching, ready to curse and chop onions with reckless determination. But Tyrell stayed away, and Marcus carried that absence like a stone in his chest. One Wednesday evening, as the volunteers packed up, Ethan pulled Marcus aside. "There's a city council hearing next week," he said. "They're discussing Ordinance 47, food distribution without permits. They'll likely cite your truck as the case study." Marcus groaned. "So they're shutting us down?" "Not necessarily. If the community speaks up, if they see the good you're doing, they may grant an exception. But you'll need allies. And you'll need Tyrell." Marcus frowned. "Why Tyrell?" Ethan's eyes softened. "Because stories matter. Yours is weighed down by guilt. His is weighed down by loss. If the two of you stand together, maybe people will listen." Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't imagine Tyrell forgiving him enough to stand at his side. But Ethan's words gnawed at him through the night. Tyrell finally returned on a Thursday. Marcus spotted him at the edge of the courtyard, hood up, hands buried in his pockets. He didn't approach the truck. He just watched. Marcus left the pot and walked over, each step heavy. "You came back." "I didn't come to chop onions," Tyrell said flatly. "I wouldn't ask you to." Marcus paused. I wanted to tell you again how sorry I am. For Elijah. For everything." Tyrell's jaw clenched. "Sorry doesn't fix it." "I know." Marcus's voice cracked. "But I need you to know this truck isn't about me anymore. It's about everyone who stands in that line. And whether you hate me or not, they need you. You're good at this. Better than me, some days." Tyrell's eyes flickered. Anger, grief, doubt, layered like glass. "Why should I help you? Why should I let the man who killed my brother stand next to me and pretend he's saving lives?" Marcus swallowed hard. Because maybe saving lives is the only thing that makes the loss even bearable. Not erasing it. Just bearing it. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Tyrell shook his head. "I don't know if I can forgive you. Maybe I never will." "You don't have to," Marcus said. "You just have to help feed people." Tyrell turned to leave. But before disappearing into the night, he muttered, "I'll think about it." The following evening, Lena found Marcus sitting on the truck steps, staring at the snow. She handed him a thermos of tea. "You look like you haven't slept in days." "Tyrell was here," Marcus said. Lena's brows rose. "And he's not ready." "Then let him take his time." She sipped her tea. "You're always trying to fix everything overnight. Some wounds take years." Marcus exhaled. "I don't have years. The council hearing is in 6 days. If they shut us down." Lena's eyes hardened. "Then we fight. Not just you. All of us." For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "You make it sound possible." "It is," she said, "if you stop carrying it alone." Sunday came with a biting wind. The line stretched farther than Marcus had ever seen. Families, teenagers, even office workers who had heard the news and come to support. Volunteers moved like clockwork, filling bowls and passing bread. And then Marcus saw him. Tyrell, standing in line, not with his hood up this time, but with his shoulders squared. When he reached the truck, he didn't ask for food. He looked Marcus in the eye and said, "When's the hearing?" "Tuesday," Marcus replied. Tyrell nodded slowly. "I'll be there." Marcus's breath caught. He wanted to say thank you, wanted to say more, but Tyrell was already moving, taking a bowl, sitting down with the others at the table. For the first time in years, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not absolution, not peace, but the faintest possibility of second chances, not just for him, but for Tyrell, for Lena, for everyone who had gathered around the battered truck. One table at a time, one meal at a time, one fragile, stubborn second chance at a time. The Detroit City Council chamber was packed. Wooden pew-like benches groaned beneath the weight of neighbors, reporters, volunteers, and skeptics alike. Television cameras lined the back wall. The smell of wet coats and tension filled the air. Outside, snow piled against the courthouse steps, but inside the heat was suffocating. Marcus sat at a long table facing the council, his hands clasped tight enough that his knuckles whitened. Beside him sat Reverend Ethan, calm and steady. And next to Ethan, though he hadn't been sure until the last moment, was Tyrell. His jaw was tight, his fists clenched on the table, but he was there. That fact alone was a miracle. The council chair, a woman with steel-gray hair and glasses perched on her nose, rapped the gavel. "We are here to discuss Ordinance 47 and whether the food truck operated by Marcus Hayes should be permitted to continue distributing meals without formal licensing. Mr. Hayes, you may begin." Marcus's throat felt dry. He wasn't a man for speeches, but the room demanded words. He stood, the weight of every eye pressing against him. "I'm not here to excuse myself," he said. "Most of you already know who I am. I was a chef. I made a terrible choice. I drank. I drove. And a man died because of me. His name was Elijah Jenkins. I served my sentence, but I live with that guilt every day. When I came here, I didn't plan to start anything. I just wanted to feed a few people who were hungry. That's all it was at the beginning. But people came. They needed food. And the line grew. So I kept cooking." He paused, glancing at the faces in the audience. Some nodded. Others glared. "This truck isn't mine anymore," Marcus continued. "It belongs to everyone who lines up. To the volunteers who chop and stir. To the mothers who bring spices from home. To the kids who laugh while we serve. We're not running a restaurant. We're keeping people alive. If you shut us down, the hunger doesn't disappear. It just goes back into the shadows where no one sees it." The chair studied him for a moment. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." "Reverend Brooks." Ethan stood, his voice calm. "I've known Marcus since before his fall. I've seen his sin and his remorse. But I've also seen the tables he's set in our community. I've seen neighbors eating together who never would have spoken otherwise. You can call it unlicensed. You can call it irregular. But I call it holy work. If the law cannot bend to make space for grace, then the law is poorer for it." A murmur rippled through the room. Then the chair turned to Tyrell. "And you, young man, you requested to speak." Tyrell stood, his shoulders squared, his voice rough with emotion. "My name is Tyrell Jenkins. Elijah Jenkins was my brother." The room stilled. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching. "I hated Marcus Hayes," Tyrell said. "I wanted him to rot in prison. When I was inside myself, I thought about what he did every single day. And when I got out, I never expected to see him again. Then I found him in that truck, cooking stew like nothing had happened. I wanted to burn the whole thing down. But then, I stayed. I chopped onions. I served food. I watched people eat who hadn't eaten all day. And I realized something. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. I realized that hating him didn't feed anyone. But working with him did. My brother can't come back. Nothing changes that. But maybe some good can come from the man who took him. Not forgiveness. Not forgetting. Just something good. The silence after his words was thick, trembling. Marcus's eyes burned, but he didn't look at Tyrell. He didn't deserve to. Yet his chest felt cracked open, light seeping in through wounds he thought would never heal. The chair nodded gravely. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. We'll hear from others now. Voices rose one by one from the benches. An older woman with a cane said the truck's soup had kept her alive through the winter. A young mother testified that her children called Marcus's meals magic bowls. A social worker argued that unlicensed food distribution posed risks of illness, citing regulations and safety codes. A restaurant owner claimed Marcus was undermining legitimate businesses. The debate raged, each testimony cutting or defending. Lena stood too, her voice steady though her hands shook. I don't trust Marcus Hayes. I don't forgive him. But I bring my son to eat at his table because the food is safe and the people there are kind. If the city shuts this down, what message do you send? That redemption isn't possible? That feeding people is a crime? You don't have to absolve him. But don't punish the rest of us. The room erupted in mixed applause and jeers. The chair banged the gavel for order. Finally, the testimonies ended. The council conferred quietly, heads bowed together. Marcus sat frozen, his heart pounding. Every word from the crowd echoed in his skull. Every face of those he'd served, every memory of Elijah, every sleepless night pressed down on him like the walls of a cell. After what felt like hours, the chair spoke. The council recognizes the need for safety, oversight, and fairness. But we also recognize the extraordinary service this food program has provided to the vulnerable. Therefore, the council will not shut down the truck. Instead, Mr. Hayes and his team will be granted a provisional permit under city supervision, with conditions for health standards and regular inspections. Relief swept through the room. Cheers, clapping, even weeping. Marcus sagged back in his chair, his body trembling with exhaustion. It wasn't full acceptance. It wasn't absolution. But it was life. It was permission to continue. Beside him, Tyrell sat stiffly, his face unreadable. But when their eyes met, he gave the faintest nod. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a beginning. That evening, the courtyard outside the church filled again. Lights strung across the tables. Bread passed hand to hand. Stew ladled into bowls. The line was longer than ever, but no one complained. For once, it felt like the whole city had shown up. Marcus moved among them quietly, his apron stained, his hands sore. But for the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. Not because his sins were erased, not because he was redeemed, but because the work continued. At one end of the table, Mateo laughed as Tyrell showed him how to balance a roll on his nose. At the other, Lena shared cilantro from her bag, insisting the stew needed it. Ethan poured hot tea into paper cups. Strangers broke bread, shoulders brushing, voices mingling. Marcus stood at the center of it all, the battered truck looming behind him. His past was still there, carved into him like scars. But so was this moment. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The provisional permit should have been a victory. For a few weeks, it felt like one. The line outside the truck grew steadier, the meals warmer, the community stronger. Inspectors came, checked temperatures, glanced at sanitation. Marcus complied, quietly relieved that the scrutiny was manageable. For once, the rhythm felt almost normal. Prep, serve, clean, sleep. But peace never lasts. It started with whispers. Flyers appeared on lampposts near the church and on car windshields downtown. Don't eat from the hands of a killer. Some were signed by a group calling itself Justice First, a small but loud coalition of victims' rights advocates. Their message was simple. Marcus Hayes didn't deserve a second chance, and the city was wrong to give him one. At first, Marcus ignored it. He told Tyrell and Lena the same thing. We keep cooking. That's what matters. But then the protests came. One evening, as the tables filled, a crowd of 15 marched down the block holding signs. No meals for murderers. Justice for Elijah. Shut it down. They shouted loud enough to drown out conversation. Some guests left their bowls untouched, nervous under the gaze of cameras and chants. Others shouted back, sparking arguments that nearly turned violent. Marcus stood frozen behind the pot. He wanted to speak, to quiet the storm, but every word stuck like glass in his throat. It was Tyrell who finally climbed onto a chair and shouted, "Back off. We're feeding people, not poisoning them." The crowd roared louder. Police sirens wailed down the block. By the time order was restored, the food was cold. That night, Lena confronted Marcus in the truck. "You can't just stand there when they come at us," she said, her eyes blazing. "You think silence makes you noble, but it doesn't. It makes you weak, and it puts us all at risk." Marcus sank onto the bench, exhausted. "If I fight back, I prove them right. If I stay quiet, I let them win. There's no way out. You don't get to hide behind guilt anymore," Lena snapped. "This isn't about you. It's about Mateo. It's about the grandmothers who need a hot meal. It's about everyone who believes in this place. If you won't speak for yourself, speak for them." Her words cut deeper than any protest sign. Marcus didn't reply. He simply bowed his head, the weight of his silence pressing harder than ever. 2 nights later, fire came. Marcus and Tyrell had just finished cleaning when the first bottle shattered against the side of the truck, flames licking upward. Another followed, exploding near the back wheel. The acrid stench of gasoline filled the air. "Get out," Marcus shouted. They scrambled into the snow, grabbing buckets of water from the church basement. Volunteers rushed to help, stamping and dousing, their shouts echoing in the cold night. By the time the fire was out, the truck was scorched, its side panel blackened, its tires melted. On the pavement, in spray paint, was one word: murderer. Marcus collapsed against the curb, coughing smoke, his chest burning. Around him, volunteers muttered, some weeping, others cursing. Tyrell kicked the charred tire, his face twisted in rage. "They won't stop. They'll burn it all down before they let you keep this going." Ethan arrived minutes later, his coat flapping, his breath ragged. He looked at the damage and shook his head. "You'll have to shut down for a while." Marcus stared at the blackened truck. It had been his last tether to a sense of purpose, his penance carved in metal and flame. "If we shut down now," he whispered, "we may never come back." The next morning, the story was everywhere. Food truck for the homeless attacked by protesters. Photos of Marcus sitting in the snow beside the burned truck made the front page. Talk shows debated endlessly. Was he a symbol of redemption or a danger to society? Rebecca appeared at the church that afternoon, her eyes full of guilt. "This is my fault," she said. "I lit the match with my article." Marcus didn't look at her. "They lit the match. But I gave them fuel." She hesitated. "Let me help you fight back. Let me write the story right this time." "No," Marcus said firmly. "No more stories. No more headlines. If people want to see the truth, they can come eat with us. That's all." Rebecca looked like she might argue, but she left quietly, her notebook tucked away. For 3 days, the truck sat silent, a husk in the courtyard. Volunteers still brought food, but it sat untouched, the air heavy with defeat. Mateo asked his mother if the magic bowls were gone forever. Lena didn't answer. Finally, Tyrell broke the silence. "We can't let them win. We'll cook out of the church basement if we have to. Tables, burners, pots, it doesn't matter. We don't need the truck to feed people." Marcus hesitated. The thought of moving on without the truck felt like ripping his heart out. But Tyrell was right. The truck was never the point. The meals were. So they adapted. That night, long tables were dragged into the basement, and the kitchen roared with life. Volunteers chopped, stirred, and ladled. The smell of stew drifted into the street. People lined up outside, and for the first time since the fire, bowls were filled again. It wasn't the same, but it was something. Later, when the line had dwindled and the last bowl was scraped, Tyrell found Marcus sitting on a crate. "You know they'll come again," he said. "Protests, fire, whatever. They're not done." Marcus nodded. "Then neither are we." Tyrell studied him for a long moment. "I still hate you, you know." "I know, but I don't hate what we're building." Marcus met his eyes. For once, there was no anger there, only truth. "Then let's keep building." Snow drifted against the church windows. The truck outside was scarred, broken, maybe beyond repair. But inside the basement, bowls clattered, children laughed, and the scent of bread lingered. And Marcus realized something. His redemption had never been about the truck. It was about the table, the one they kept setting, no matter how many times the world tried to flip it over. For now, that was enough. Winter pressed deeper into the city, biting harder each night. Snowdrifts grew high against brick walls, and the air carried the sound of coughing, of hunger. The truck sat blackened and useless in the courtyard, a scar of fire against white snow. But the basement of the church glowed with life. Each night, the tables filled. Each night, bowls were passed, bread broken, laughter rising against the cold. Marcus stood at the head of it all, apron stained, hands sore. He moved like a man carrying weight, but also like a man unwilling to drop it. Tyrell was there too, knife in hand, still rough, but steadier now. Lena helped portion bread, Matteo darting between tables with cups of tea, a grin plastered across his face. Ethan oversaw it quietly, his eyes filled with pride. And yet, outside, the protests had not vanished. Justice first grew louder. They staged rallies, waving Elijah Jenkins's photo in front of cameras. They shouted Marcus's name like a curse. The council debated revoking the provisional permit after the fire, citing continued unrest. Reporters called daily, eager for another headline. One Sunday evening, after a long day of chopping and stirring, Marcus gathered everyone in the basement. Volunteers, neighbors, children, they circled around the big pot. "They want to shut us down again," he said. His voice was rough, but steady. "We can't fight with fire. We can't fight with fists. The only way we fight is by feeding. If they want to see who we are, let's show them." "How?" a volunteer asked. Marcus looked around the room. "We set one more table. Outside. In the snow. And we invite everyone. Protesters, supporters, reporters, neighbors. One table. No sides. Just a meal." Silence followed. Then Tyrell spoke. "You're crazy." "Maybe," Marcus said. "But if this ends, I want it to end at the table. Not in fire. Not in silence. At the table." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll do." The day of the meal arrived with icy wind cutting through the streets. Volunteers dragged tables into the courtyard, brushing snow from their surfaces. They strung lights overhead, their glow soft against the gray sky. The smell of stew drifted outward, carried far into the neighborhood. By dusk, people began to gather. Supporters first, families, neighbors, those who had eaten many times before. Then reporters, cameras rolling. Finally, the protesters, signs held high, voices raised. "No meals for murderers. Justice for Elijah." Marcus stepped forward, ladle in hand. "Tonight," he said, his voice echoing, "there are no sides. Everyone has a seat. Everyone eats." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Lena carried a basket of bread to the first table. Matteo followed with cups of tea. Tyrell, face tight, ladled stew into bowls and set them down in front of strangers. Slowly, people sat. Some protesters refused, standing stiff with their signs. Others hesitated, then lowered themselves onto the benches, curiosity overcoming anger. And then, like a ripple through water, conversation began. Small at first, complaints about the cold, murmurs about the flavor of the stew, shared salt packets. Then laughter, cautious but real. Marcus moved among them quietly, filling bowls, handing bread. Every time he looked up, he saw faces he never thought he'd see together. A grandmother laughing with a college student, a protester arguing heatedly with a volunteer, then accepting another ladle of stew. It wasn't harmony, not yet, but it was something. Rebecca stood at the edge, notebook closed, watching. For once, she didn't write. She simply sat down, accepted a bowl, and ate. When the last person was seated, Marcus took a place at the end of the table. Across from him sat Tyrell. The young man's eyes burned, but he didn't look away. He lifted his bowl, took a long sip, and set it down with a nod. For Marcus, it felt like the first fragile step across a chasm that had once seemed endless. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but acknowledgement. The meal lasted hours. Snow fell softly around the tables, hissing against the kerosene heaters. When the last bowls were empty, when the bread was gone, Marcus stood once more. "This doesn't erase anything," he said. His voice cracked in the cold air. "I live every day with what I've done. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't expect it. But tonight, we showed something. That even with our pain, even with our anger, we can sit at the same table. We can share bread. That doesn't heal everything. But maybe it's a start." Silence followed. Then Lena's voice rose clear. "A start is enough." The crowd murmured, some nodding, some still frowning. But no one walked away hungry. And for Marcus, That was the victory. Later that night, after the tables were cleared and the courtyard empty, Marcus stood alone in front of the burned truck. Snow coated its blackened frame, muting the scars. He touched the cold metal, his reflection faint in the charred surface. Ethan joined him quietly. "It won't last forever," the Reverend said. "The fights, the protests, the doubt. But neither will the truck. Nothing built by hands lasts forever. What lasts is the table, the one you set for others. That table doesn't burn." Marcus closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt the weight on his chest ease. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. Bearable. "Then we keep setting it," Marcus said. Months later, spring crept into the city. The snow melted, leaving puddles and patches of green. The truck, though never repaired, remained in the courtyard, a monument to fire and survival. But the meals continued, sometimes in the church basement, sometimes outside under the open sky. Marcus no longer cooked alone. Tyrell worked beside him, his knife steady, his silence softer. Lena oversaw bread and tea, Mateo darting between tables with laughter. Volunteers came and went, but the table never emptied. Word spread far beyond Detroit. Donations arrived from strangers who had read about the meals. Students wrote papers about the table in the snow. A filmmaker asked to document it. But Marcus kept his focus on the stew, the bread, the line. One bowl at a time. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the tables filled, Marcus stood for a moment and simply watched. Children laughing, strangers talking, bread breaking. For the first time, he saw not his guilt but their community. And he realized something. Redemption wasn't about wiping away the past. It was about choosing every single day to build something good from the ruins. The last meal truck might never run again, but the last table would keep growing. And in that, Marcus finally found hope.